learned. Get comfortable dropping your shin forward. Learn to pressurize the middle and front of the foot. Build strength through a full range of motion in all different directions. Add load, speed, and complexity, which is graded exposure. Go in the direction that they need to go with their sport. That's what is very, very important. So if I can figure out a way to, continue on. So we're going to map out the rehab process. Again, you can think of this as training the feet, strengthening the feet, working with someone who's not necessarily a rehab athlete. It's just someone who has particular limitations down there. So we're going to look at something like this graph where we have floor and open chain work first. I am not going to go through that in this presentation because I think it's so simple. If you think about like open chain work, someone can't weight bear through their feet yet. They're just going to sit on the floor and they're going to do ankle circles. Or they might do plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. They might have a band pulling around their foot and they just kind of move their foot forward and back and in circles. They might do big toe lifts and stuff like that. They might do some of the exercises that we've popularized, foam roller bridges, wall strides, stuff like that, where they're lying on their back. They're not fully weight bearing. That's where you'll usually start with people who can't fully weight bear. But ideally, you will get them up into standing as soon as possible because feet and ankles need gravity. They need us standing on top of them for us to load into them. So we're going to restore foot and ankle mobility as soon as possible. And sometimes with some athletes, this is an ongoing thing, that they're not an injured athlete. They're just playing their sport and their ankles and their feet and the rest of their body often gets very tight. So we're like pushing them strength-wise, making sure they have the mobility or making sure they can like let go of some tension, and it's just a constant to and fro. That's the real world, to be honest. We're going to build a lot of strength on the forefoot. This is a very easy thing to do just by putting people on the forefoot, just by getting them into positions where they have their heels off the floor. That would be easy peasy to do and so valuable, easy to coach, easy to do. I have videos for all of this stuff. We are going to do some hinging work where we have a positive shin angle. We're staying on the front of our feet. We're going to do some squatting work where we have a positive shin angle. I'll explain what that is as we go along, so don't worry if you're a little bit confused. We're going to do some jumps where we're not trying to be too stiff and elastic and quick off the ground. We're actually going to sink down into deeper ranges of motion. We are going to do some pogos where we are trying to be semi-quick off the ground at least and be nice and springy. We're going to do some bounds, we're going to do some hops, and then we're going to do some running and change of direction. So this is, to be honest, like if you are someone who has been unsure about how do I rehab a foot issue or an ankle issue or an Achilles or a shin or something like that, this is how. This is how you do it. Of course, you'd have calf raises in here somewhere, like probably all the way through. But you're still, that's just a simple like strength exercise that you're going to continue to work on. But if you want to progress in terms of load, speed, complexity towards more specific things like running and change of direction, then this type of graph will help you, will help your client. And I would be drawing this type of graph out for all of my clients that are starting down here. Hopefully you can see my mouse down at foot and ankle mobility and need to get back up to running and change the direction. I would be drawing this for every single client, or at least the clients that I want to keep, because if I draw it for them, they'll want to come back. If I say, right, this week we're working on a lot of foot and ankle mobility and maybe some forefoot strength. Next week we're going to get into some hinging and squatting variations where we're still working on foot and ankle mobility and forefoot strength at the same time. If we can be good there in a week or 2 weeks time, we're going to go on to sinky jumps and pogos and so on. Like if you tell your client that and you can plan that out and be clear with them, you and them together are clear on where you need to go. Of course, this can change. You can go up and down and you can mix stuff up. And maybe on session 1, you can do pogos with someone. Maybe you can't do pogos with someone else until session 12 or week 12 or whatever. It doesn't matter. At least you have an idea in your mind of what a step-by-step kind of progression could be. I've used this with a lot of people to great effect, and it will never be exactly like this, but at least you need to understand what it could be like. So the discourse that I hear online for foot and ankle issues basically comes back to should we be doing seated calf raises or standing calf raises? And I just don't think that's a good enough question to ask. I think it's a very poor question to ask. Seated or standing calf raises. The reason I put these videos in is because before I say that this stuff isn't good enough on its own, I should at least show you that I still use this stuff. So I'm not saying don't use this stuff. This is the same client, an Achilles rupture client. I'm not saying don't use this stuff. I'm just saying it's not good enough. It's both like kind of, you're just so constrained into a certain position. You're not actually moving in terms of like your body isn't transitioning from one position to another. You're just pushing up and down, and that's really good for training the calves, the plantar flexors, but it's not good enough. Well, it's not good enough for training other things. So we want to train a lot of other things, and if we appreciate the complexity of the foot and the ankle and the lower leg and what it needs to be able to do, then hopefully you can appreciate that just doing these two things isn't enough, even though they're still very important. If I was to choose one, I would choose a standing calf raise all day long, because you can get a lot of, because it's just a better exercise. You can load it better and you can load all of the muscles better, but it doesn't train movement well enough. It just trains you to get stronger at going up and down in this movement. So if we look at this video, it's one of my favorite videos at looking at how we pressurize a foot as we go through dynamic movement, and how a shin drops, and how what the foot needs to do to allow the hips to work and all of this stuff. This is from Sven Nipples. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. He's a guy on Instagram. You should give him a follow. I think he is a German sprinter. So if we look at the video first, and then if I walk you through it in a sec, I'll play it again for you. So he's doing a single leg box jump, I think you could call it, and I think it's a nice impressive movement. But a lot of people online you'll hear talking about foot to glute connection and all these kind of terms that don't really mean anything. Like, no one knows what they mean. It's just like, oh, your big toe and your glute, and like, what does that mean? So let's understand what a foot needs to do to allow your big juicy hip muscles to work really well, and vice versa. So if we just try and take this frame by frame, we'll see that he starts on a vertical shin. I'm talking about his left leg now, which is important, right? So it's his left leg. His shin is pretty vertical, which means his knee is basically above his ankle, all right? He has a lot of pressure on his left heel. If you were to ask him to jump up from here, he can't do that, or no one can do that. They're not going to get very high. They're going to use their spine a lot, and they're going to look like a dolphin. So obviously they're going to have to drop down a bit to push back up again. You're going to have to load into your leg, lengthen some muscles so you can push back out of there. So watch what that means. What does that actually mean? He is going to drop his shin. I'm talking about his left tibia now. Understand this, because you're going to see this in everything. Every jump, every squat, every sprint, anything remotely athletic where you're moving forwards or up, or forwards and up, you're going to see this. Vertical shin with heel pressure on his left foot, drops his shin forward, and he ends up with a lot more midfoot pressure. So the midfoot is where his laces are here, and his weight is coming straight down into the midfoot now, and now he has a positive shin angle. So his knee is in front of his ankle. So this is really important. He can't load his glute. People talk about glute load and glute activation. He can't load his glute unless he actually drops his shin forward. He's not going to be able to. When he drops his shin forward into this position, his femur has like almost the opposite angle, and now he's actually loaded into his hip muscles. So even though this is a foot and ankle presentation, you need to understand that if people aren't dropping their shin forward, they're not really using their hip muscles that well. They can't load and lengthen into them. So he goes from a vertical shin to a positive shin angle. He goes from heel pressure to midfoot pressure. When he goes to decide, right, I'm finished kind of loading down, he doesn't just go straight up like a calf raise, like people seem to think, this triple extension thing where I just get in and I just push out and everything extends together. That's not what happens, and that's really important. You'll see that his knee is as bent as it's going to be. His ankle is as dorsiflexed as it's going to be. And all he does is he shifts his pressure forward. So watch the pressure shifting forward in his foot even more. And it ends up more in his forefoot and his toes now. And then it actually stays there. This is the most important part that people, I don't think, understand very well. Once he shifts his pressure forward in his foot, if you watch his left shin, his left ankle and his left foot, his heel is off the floor just a little bit now. And actually, it's not going to move. His left foot, his left shin isn't going to move. Now, you can't say to me that this is an isometric for his whole body. It's not, because look at his right leg. His right leg is moving a ton. His torso is moving in space. There's a lot of movement. There's just no movement, or basically no movement, at his left foot and ankle and shin. So all of the stuff, and stuff is a good description down there, because I'm talking about all the muscles and all the different layers of muscles and all the different everything down there, all around this lower leg and the foot, is actually holding still. It's holding an isometric or a quasi-isometric. And what that allows him to do is pin his shin forward, and now he can actually start to get hip extension. So you'll see that he extends his hip, and only when his hip is, this left hip moving forward and up, only when his hip has gone through a lot of extension, then do you see his knee start to extend. And then do you see his ankle start to extend? And then he ends up on the box. So what I'm saying is, just being in a seated calf raise, yes, you need your calf to be very strong to hold this isometric. But if you can't drop your shin forward into that position, what good is it? You're just going to push backwards and up, because he can't actually get forward and get his pressure forward. So dropping your shin forward, getting into a position where your heel is slightly off the floor, this doesn't get trained very well, I don't think. This isn't, now I'm going to just plantar flex up into the sky. No, he's plantar flexing down hard into the floor, but he's not moving. He's holding it there. And that allows him to get hip extension, knee extension, and then ankle extension. All right? So triple extension doesn't just happen where everything extends together, or very rarely does that happen. It happens where you start to see the ankle, the distal tissues, holding an isometric, while the more proximal areas are able to produce a lot more force. So that's what he's doing there. So we are going to spend, I think this is vastly undertrained, the dropping of the shin forward. I think it's something that with all of my clients, I see they've done calf raises for years. They're not getting rid of the issue, or they're getting stronger, but it's not transferring over or whatever. And we just spend a lot of time getting people to learn to drop their shin forward, number one. And once it's forward, keep it forward for longer, number two, and do things with our hip up above. So a lot of the presentation will be showing you exercises where we do a lot of things where we focus on, one, dropping the shin forward, two, keeping the shin forward, three, making sure the heel is slightly off the floor, not high up in a high calf raise, slightly off the floor like he has here, and then four, doing things from that position. All right.
That is the end of the free preview of this webinar. If you would like to continue watching this, please head to strengthcoachnetwork.com, click on the Become a Member, and you will be able to check out this webinar and the entire site for $1 for a trial membership. Again, head to strengthcoachnetwork.com and be able to check this webinar out for only $1.